Here we are for another Awakened Tank review with the Dragon. If you're not aware, for the month of October, I'm reviewing every Awakened mode tank that I currently own every other day. Also recently announced was the date of the Awakened mode release, being the 22nd of October through to the 4th of November, so it's coming up quickly. And if you remember that every year we get to earn one of these tanks for free, you might be upset to hear that there's been a slight change to that op this time around. Rather than every previously made Awakened mode tank being available to earn, they've given us only a selection of just 8 takes to choose from. Luckily, however, the tank we're going over today is in that selection, the Tier 7 Chinese Premium Light Tank, the Dragon Type 62. And before we get into the analysis, yes, this tank, like the ones we've already gone over, is just a skin version of an already existing tank. And while the previous tanks had major or minor differences, this one is actually identical to the Type 62 in every way. The only base statistical difference is that this, of course, is a skin version of the tank, and thus there's no need to apply camo to the tank yourself, which also means its camo is the same as if you applied camo to the Type 62. Other than that, the two tanks are completely identical. Now let's go over that gun. I believe it's an 85mm gun that deals 180 alpha damage. This is different to the Chinese Techtree's WZ-131, which has a 200 alpha damage 85mm and is instead closer to that of the LTG. It does have some pretty decent DPM from its 5.5 second reload time, giving it a base 1964 DPM. This is slightly above average for the Tyrian class, so it's at least nice on that front. Its penetration values, however, do take a hit, at least in its standard pen. Its standard AP round has 145mm of standard penetration with only 793 shell speed. As for its premium ammunition, it does get better in terms of the class overall, with 220mm of premium heat penetration at the same 793 shell speed. So while the heat feels at least decent, the standard pen is definitely among the lower end and can be quite annoying since spamming heat is less effective than spamming APCR. But as for its gun handling statistics, it does have 0.37 accuracy, which is pretty average, and 2.3 seconds aim time, which is on the longer end of the Tyrian class, but ultimately it's fine. What's not is the abysmal lowest available 5 degrees of gun depression. Even the Techtree WZ-131 gets 6 degrees, which isn't great, but it's better than 5 obviously. This shouldn't seem like an issue for light tanks, since you would think you won't try and work ridges, but it just limits what positions you can be useful in to deal damage from. It's just a limiting factor that is pretty rough, to be honest. I really didn't enjoy this gun though. It's not terrible, but the lack of depression in standard pen did feel limiting at times, especially on certain maps or in bottom tier situations. But using speed to outmaneuver tanks to be able to use your lesser pen is how light tanks do, right? And this can do that, of course, but it's among the heaviest light tanks, making its mobility not as tight and powerful as the rest of them. Its top speed does reach 60 kilometers an hour, which isn't the slowest thankfully, and despite that weight and seemingly low 430 horsepower, it still does get above a 20 power to weight ratio with 20.48. But that is the lowest ratio bar the French 1357s at this tier in class. You will still feel like a light tank and be able to move as one, but you will definitely notice how less agile you are compared to other lights, although you do have an amazing 54 track traverse speed. With that turn speed and the speeds you're given, it does allow you to ram other light tanks quite nicely. Just make sure you're not ramming the Alf Klarung's Panzer Panther, as you might regret that one, as it's the only heavier light tank than you by nearly double your weight. Every other light tank is available for you to ram quite nicely. With that weight weighing you down though, it does make you one of the best armored light tanks in the group. The Chinese lights are up there with the Russians for best armored light tanks, but of course, you're still a light tank. So talking about armor is way more about lucky bounces than it is about utilizing that armor to block damage intentionally. This tank is basically a miniature medium with its armor layout and looks, and the upper plate and face are decently thick enough to give you the upper edge against mostly other light tanks when dealing with them. One bounce from the enemy light tank might just turn the tide of that encounter in your favor, and it's something that will definitely happen, but you still can't count on it to save you reliably. So don't go getting into fights unnecessarily thinking the armor will give you the win against the other light. With that being said as well, you are one of the tankier light tanks in terms of HP too, with 880 HP. But surprisingly, that's not that high compared to many other tanks, and it's not the highest either, with even its tech tree brother having 900, and surprisingly, the French 1357s having even more too. It's still a nice chunk of HP to trade with though. Of course, armor is not as important as your ability to sneak around and spot in a light tank, right? Its view range is at the top of its class with 390 meters view range, only being beaten by the Panther and the anti-pref Lycan. It does match many others though that have 390 meters as well, meaning those with better camo will outspot you despite having 390. Its camo isn't the greatest as they are decently big tanks, but I was surprised to see that they had better camo than the Americans, and of course the Panther, but worse camo than most of the ones you'd expect. And I think it's because of the mid camo and the slower speeds and the lack of gun depression that made me actually dislike this tank overall. When playing this tank, I actually looked forward to the game's ending and moving on to a different one. The games I was getting weren't enjoyable, and I really see no gleaming positives to this tank that I could try my best to capitalize on. It's just a mediocre tank that I wish I loved, because I actually really loved the Chinese tech tree light tank grind. I loved how different they were to your standard light tank tropes, and how they were on the heavier and harder hitting side. Despite this tank having the better DPM, I think I'd rather play the tech tree Chinese light tank with that extra degree of gun depression, the higher damage and penetration values over this thing. I feel like with that gun and slightly better flexibility for positioning, I could do more with that damage and pen and HP to negate the lower DPM and even view range of that tank. It's just a far more interesting and fun tank to me than this one was, and that sucks, because I wanted to like this tank a lot. But what also sucks is that this is a tank gifted to me, meaning at some point, I gotta 3 mark it. That should be fun, shouldn't it? You know what the tech tree tank doesn't get though? The ability to partake in the Awaken mode. This tank may be pretty middle of the road in standard play, but does it excel in the Awaken mode? Sadly, not really. It's just a normal tank in there with one albeit really cool and unique interaction with the map. And let me restate that. It really is just a normal tank. You shoot just regular damaging rounds at tanks and play like a normal one against all these unique tanks. And what do you get to do? Well, when you drive onto special platforms that will be marked on the map for you, it opens up a portal and dumps you somewhere else on the map, hopefully away from enemies. But don't worry, that's not all, because doing so will heal you. So it's one way to stay in the fight, as well as a way to run away and disengage from one when you can. It's a pretty cool mechanic to be honest, but it does get boring pretty quick, since you're just a normal tank against these other tanks. You feel more like a rat than a dragon. And it's just a shame this couldn't get a fiery breath type of round to help make it stand out a bit more, despite there being 2 other fire breathing tanks already at that point. It's just a bit disappointing. If you want to see this ability in action, I will be streaming on Halloween here on YouTube of just the Awaken mode tanks that I've reviewed and showcasing their abilities for you guys to see. If you miss out on the stream, the VOD should be saved here on the channel. And with its Awaken mode ability being so bland and its standard play being uninteresting as well, it does make it a pretty hard sell for me. It's definitely low on the priority list, at least being above the Kaiju, because this tank does have the same sort of situation as the Gornich, where they're both skin versions of premium tanks. So if you don't have the unskinned version, then this is the version to pick up if you really want that Type 62, since it comes with a skin pre-equipped and the ability to partake in an annual event mode. But other than that, it's not a tank to seek out unless you're collecting or you're interested yourself in what you see. With that out of the way, let's go over my loadout before we get into the gameplay. Equipment wise, I used optics, camo net, and vents. I tried my best to allow this thing's light tanking capabilities to work. With the above average DPM at base, I felt I could do without the rammer to at least try and perform the light tank duties with the best camo and view range it could get. Consumables were my usual premium repair kit, food rations, and standard med kit, and my commander was set up with my light tank crew, with 6th Sense, Situational Awareness, Camo Expertise, Born Leader, Steady Aim, Rapid Loading, Snapshot, Run and Gun, and Marked Target. And here we are on Hidden Village. This isn't the best game that I had, but the best game that I had bots in it. And so I'm not showing you that game because it's tainted. This is not an ace tanker though. And much like other tanks in this review lineup, that I've provided gameplay that wasn't insanely amazing, it's because I got bored of this one. There was other tanks to play, obviously, right? And it may seem like a few of these tanks so far have been pretty mid or pretty boring to me. And that's just because these first few tanks were either mid tiers, right? Or even like lower tiers with the tier 6 that are skin tanks of tanks that are pretty old and thus pretty left behind. But trust me, we will be getting to more interesting tanks pretty soon. And with that being said, this isn't an insane gameplay, obviously, but it does at least provide your usual experience if you're doing well in this tank. I am spotting for the team. My other light tank's behind me, which means I get to get all this spotting to myself if anybody can shoot them. And the more I spot that are back behind the river, the more my team that's pushing in the city can push around and shoot them in the side. So as long as I keep these guys at bay, keep them looking at me, keep them spotted so they're too scared to go out, it means I might be able to get some more spotting out of it. Now, we might actually get a shot on this Ferdinand with a heat round, and we do! 5 degrees of gun depression, and we were still able to work this ridge. And see, that's just how limiting it is, right? If I had 6 degrees of gun depression, I wouldn't expose so much of myself, and I, like, man, lost a shot there because of it. It's just so limiting. Couldn't look to the left because my gun goes up. And it's for that reason, too, that the WZ-131 would just feel better. When you do have a shot, you hit harder, you have better pens in that tank, and you have 1 extra degree of gun depression to allow me to work a ridge like this. Just slightly better. Ever so slightly better. This tank really just doesn't feel special in any way, right? Like I mentioned, I would rather play the Chinese tech tree line because they felt more unique or different enough that their upsides and to their downsides could at least feel powerful enough that warranted it, right? But this, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have that big of downsides compared to the tech tree, but there's no upsides either that are massive in any way. So far our only shot of damage has been against that Ferdinand, but we've gotten a fair few bit of spotting so far, and we're hoping to get much more because it's only 12 to 11, and I'm trying to proxy spot or work under this ridge so that if anything's above me, those heavy tanks out in the city can at least shoot them. Unfortunately, there's nothing, and this IKV-90B scares me. We put another round into him. We got all the spotting off of him, and he somehow, or for some reason, had a fire extinguisher. But he's gone, so we got rid of him, got some free damage out of it. Now this Borsig's not looking at us, so we're gonna get 1 shot into him for free, but then back off because there's no way we're letting him poke. Now there is one thing I failed to mention in the review, and that is that the HE on this tank actually is quite a significant jump in damage if you choose to use it. You go from 180 damage to 300. And honestly, I should have had some HE loaded in this tank. Maybe that would have helped make me feel special. Not really, though. But, like, I could have shot that Borsig for a lot more. But anyway, now we have the rears of tanks. So we're just going to get some free kills. We've maxed out at 2124 spotting damage, which is pretty decent, to be honest, for a hidden village game. But now it's 10 to 4 and it's cleanup time. So how much damage can we get out of this? There's still a lot of HP on the board, and we've gotten 4 kills. So I said this is my best XP game that wasn't a bot game. So How far can we push this damage? Well, if we're gonna have the sides or this rear of this larva, then we're gonna get a lot of damage, aren't we? Hoping to set him on fire with a heat round. I know I don't need the heat to shoot the side of the larva, but if I hit that engine deck and I hit that engine, the likelihood of setting him on fire is a lot higher with a heat round. Unfortunately, I just kept going too far forward or too far back on that engine deck. But we do get another kill with him, and we got 1,000 damage out of that. So that put us at 1848 damage and 5 kills. 1800 base XP flat. That's a nice number. But that only goes for first class, surprisingly. Which, I mean, I wish it was an ace, but it wasn't. This tank's just mediocre. There's really nothing much more to say about it. I already told you how this is low on the priority, and if you want this really badly, it's probably for collection purposes, right? Thank you for watching, though. That's all I have to say about the Dragon Type 62. See you in the next one. Take care.